Good morning. This is Christine Schlinker with the Greater Houston Port Bureau. It is now 10:45 and we are ready to get started with this webinar. I'm going to hand the mic over to Captain Bill Deal.
Good morning. I'm Bill Deal, President of the Greater Houston Port Bureau, and I want to welcome you to our conversation. Today, we have the opportunity to talk with Senator John Cornyn on what he believes are the key issues near-term and long-term for the country related to COVID-19 and on some possible infrastructure investments. A few housekeeping notes before we introduce the Senator. First off, this webinar is being recorded so that we can share it with our larger port community afterwards. Second, everyone is on the listen mode only. So if you have a computer or smartphone app, you can still ask questions. Go down to the Q&A feature, which should be on the bottom of your screen. As we finish the questions we already received in advance, we may get to some of those questions. You'll see, if you see that someone has already asked a question that you'd like, please upvote it so we know there's a priority on that question. After we speak with Senator Cornyn, we'll have someone from the Small Business Administration on the line to answer questions about loans available for small businesses. Now I will turn it over to Chad Burke, President of the Economic Alliance of the Houston Port Region.
Thank you, Bill. And thank you to our Economic Alliance and Port Bureau members for joining us today. All of you know that Senator Cornyn has been a great supporter of the Houston Ship Channel and the related petrochemical industries here in Houston. We're all very appreciative of his leadership and the time that he's affording us today. Brief introduction, Senator Cornyn was first elected to the U.S. Senate in 2002. He is currently serving his third term after being reelected in 2008 and in 2014. He sits on the Senate Finance, Intelligence, and Judiciary Committees, where he helps craft legislation for all 28 million Texans. Senator, at this time, welcome, and we will turn the floor over to you for your comments.
Well, thank you, Chad and Bill, and I want to thank all of my friends at the Greater Houston Port Bureau and the Economic Alliance Houston Port Region for organizing this video call so we can talk about the resources that are available in response to this virus. I also want to thank the Houston Small Business Administration Office for joining the call at my request, and they'll be able to help answer some technical questions. And I know with anything as big as this and something we've been trying to implement as quickly as this, there's always going to be a learning curve, but we appreciate their help and we appreciate everyone's patience as we try to get through this all together. Unfortunately, we're having a conversation about the effects of the coronavirus on your business, and I want to assure you that we're working hard to try to offset some of the challenges you face, and I want to talk to you about some of those specifically and then answer a few questions. We've passed 3 bills so far to bolster resources for healthcare providers and support our workers and the businesses who hire them, who've been impacted so dramatically by this economic fallout through no fault of their own. I want to talk to you about some of the provisions of the most recent bill, the Bipartisan CARES Act, which passed unanimously in the Senate, and it commits $2.2 trillion to this emergency, something I never would have imagined just a couple of months ago. But it was signed into law a week ago last Friday, I believe, and at the end of March, and has already brought more than $47 million in recovery grants to the Houston area. So let's talk about our healthcare providers. This bill provides $100 billion to our hospitals, many of whom have had to defer elective surgery, which is how they make ends meet. And they've also got to have surge capacity for people infected with the virus and, of course, the equipment they may need, things like ventilators and the like. So we provided $100 billion to the Americans' hospitals, and first and foremost to provide the masks, gloves, and other personal protective equipment that they need in order to operate safely. And then we've cut red tape for the development of pharmaceutical products that may well be able to cure this virus or treat it, ameliorate some of the harsher outcomes. And there are many, many clinical trials ongoing right now, and you've probably read a lot about those. And of course, then ultimately, the gold standard will be development of a vaccine. Although these viruses have known to mutate, I'm not an expert, but from what I've read, even the seasonal flu vaccine is not universally successful because of mutation of the virus. But I'll leave that to the experts. But suffice it to say that we are doing everything we know how to do on the public health front to get help where it's needed the most as fast as we possibly can. We know that millions of people are out of work and have no income through no fault of their own because of some of the public health measures that have been taken by the cities and the county and the state. And I believe the most important thing to do is get money in the hands of people who, again, through no fault of their own, aren't earning a paycheck. Hourly wage workers, people who work for tips, for example, in the hospitality industry. This bill provides a family of 4 up to $3,400. It's $1,200 an adult, obviously $2,400 for a couple, and then $500 per child, but it's on a sliding scale up to $150,000 family income. You can get a cash deposit in your bank account, hopefully within a week's time from here, that will be a lifeline to help you pay the bills, pay your rent, pay your for food and the like. And then we've dramatically increased the availability of unemployment insurance benefits beyond what's traditional. In other words, gig workers, independent contractors, 501c3s, nonprofits, and the like. And we've extended the eligibility by 13 more weeks and added an additional $600 a week benefit. This is also designed to help those workers that because their employers can't afford to sustain them on their payroll are needing to apply for unemployment insurance benefits. And so hopefully that will help. And then perhaps the biggest gun we've deployed here is something called the Paycheck Protection Program. This is a $350 billion plan through the SBA certified lenders, and there are thousands of them making millions of dollars of loans as we speak. But the goal of this is to incentivize businesses to keep their employees on their payroll if they can, through first a low interest loan, 1%, but then they can borrow up to 250% of their overhead expenses. And if they are able to keep their employees on their payroll till June, that loan will be forgiven. So it will turn from a low interest loan into a grant. They're available, as I indicated, through all SBA certified lenders, including your local bank and credit union. And the application was released last Tuesday, and banks began accepting applications last Friday. And I have heard, and it doesn't surprise any of us, that with something this big and operating this fast, there are going to be a lot of challenges, including an overwhelming number of applications. This is a new system. We've tried to make it as non-bureaucratic as possible, but I would encourage everyone to apply sooner rather than later. This has been so successful that indeed Senator McConnell went to the Senate floor and tried to replenish that fund for the Paycheck Protection Program this morning. Unfortunately, that was not successful, but we're going to continue to monitor it and continue to do the best we can to help in any way we can. I, of course, have visited countless businesses across Houston, like Southland Hardware and Curon's Restaurants, and thousands more like them. And we're going to work together to weather this storm, as we always have. Well, there's also relief for medium and larger businesses. We provided $500 billion, that's a huge sum of money, to the Department of Treasury so that the Federal Reserve can create an economic stabilization fund to provide a source of capital during the coronavirus outbreak. There's $46 billion of this earmarked for specific industries like commercial airlines, air carriers, cargo air carriers, and those critical to maintaining national security. but the remaining $454 billion will provide loans, collateralized loans, hopefully to help these businesses maintain their liquidity and to pay their bills so they can come out strong on the back end. The goal, of course, is to protect workers, protect jobs, and keep businesses afloat during this crisis. Well, there's also some other things that we've done, like increase the amount of interest expense you can deduct from 2019 to 2020 from 30 to 50%. Hopefully, again, this will increase liquidity. We've offered refundable employer retention credits for businesses that continue to pay their employees despite government orders to shut down and loss of income. And I know my staff has already been in touch with many of you about the process to apply for these programs, and I'm sure you'll learn more from the Small Business Administration representative who's on this video call. But all of you know Jay Guerrero, my regional director, Ben De Leon. They're in Houston, and I encourage you to continue to reach out to them if we can be of further assistance. I know you have many questions for the SBA, and so I'll conclude and say I look forward to seeing everyone when all this is behind us. We've always rallied as a state and as a nation when we're presented with challenges, and this will be no different. Thanks again to all my friends in Houston for making the call possible. And Chad, I'll be happy to answer or dodge a few questions.
Thank you, Senator. And I will remind everybody, we do have, excuse me, a list of some questions that everybody has sent in, and we'll pose a few of those now, but there is an option to go ahead and go down at the bottom of the screen and type in a question, and we'll get to that if we possibly can as well. But Senator, let's start with this. Based on the information that you're seeing, what is a realistic expectation or guesstimation as to a timetable of getting America back to work? And then what would that process look like?
Well, Chad, that's a $64,000 question, and we're all anxious to get back to work, but to do so safely. And I would just observe that with good personal hygiene, like washing our hands frequently and maintaining social distancing, there are already businesses that are operating in those conditions. And I suspect that when we gradually begin to see the restraints lifted, that those sorts of conditions are going to need to be important. I talked to a group of restaurant owners yesterday, and they said they're prepared to reopen their dining facilities, but they said obviously they're going to have to take out every other table and all the bar stools at the bar, and so those are the sorts of things I expect we will see as we move into the next phase. But obviously there's a real concern that some of our small businesses won't be around unless we throw them this economic lifeline and provide this assistance. That's really the impetus for what we have done so far. But we've seen in Texas that our numbers are a little different from the rest of the country. And, you know, it's a little confusing because some people are saying, well, they're asymptomatic cases where people are exposed or positive, but they just haven't been tested yet. So I think you're going to see a huge ramp up in available testing. That also will help manage isolation of people who are testing positive so they don't infect others. There's also ideas about a finger prick blood test, for example, for those who've been exposed to the virus and who've recovered and established some immunity. Obviously, those would be folks who could go back in on a volunteer basis and go back to work early while we develop these clinical trials and ultimately a vaccine. So my hope is that once we get by this month and maybe next month, we can begin to see our economy come back to life. We have to do so, and we all want to make sure that the two down quarters we're going to experience here, the first and second quarter. The second quarter is going to be pretty tough, but even some of the major financial institutions like JP Morgan and other are estimating we'll see a V-shaped bounce in the economy as we start roaring back in the third quarter and fourth quarter.
Very good, very good. Captain, I'll turn it over to you.
Good morning, Senator. As the energy capital of America, you know, the oil and petrochemical is vital to us. And Of course, we're looking at the global markets and basically Saudi Arabia and Russia. And we know that you sent a letter to the Crown Prince requesting cuts from the OPEC+1. Also, couple that with the oil demands and prices dropping domestically. Can you comment on the federal government and what they may be doing to prop up the oil and gas industry so as we get through this? Because as the largest manufacturing center in the U.S. by far, if we can come out the other side, at least in whole, we can bring the economy back in quick order. So I was just wondering if there's thoughts on Washington as far as the energy industry.
Absolutely. Well, Bill, and one thing I learned about common sense is it isn't that common. Especially when it comes to the role of the oil and gas industry in creating jobs and fueling our economy and really changing our geopolitics in the world, because we're exporting so much oil and natural gas around the world, giving our friends and allies choices rather than be dependent on autocrats and dictators who use it as a weapon. So last Friday, I was at the White House with the president. And we met with a number of the major integrated oil companies, as well as pipeline companies and some independents, and talked about this challenge. Previously, you're correct, we 15 senators, including Senator Cruz and myself, sent a letter to the Crown Prince saying that we had been a supporter of the alliance between the kingdom and the United States, but this is not a way that allies treat one another. And we said this is a reckless act by flooding the markets with cheap oil and driving the price down so that bankrupting our oil and gas sector. So that apparently was heard. We had a subsequent conversation with the ambassador, and in no uncertain terms, they understand this was not just a request, this was a demand that they deal with this. And so the meeting between those actions and what we saw happen at the White House, the president's support for the industry, he was unequivocal that he understands the importance of the energy sector in our country. And he was determined to do everything he could, including threaten the use of tariffs on imported oil. Whether or not he actually does that or just uses that as a negotiating tool remains to be seen. But I saw today, just before we came online, that it looks like I saw a news break. I'm looking forward to reading the details, but it looks like some at least tentative deal has been reached between Russia and the Saudis on production limits, which hopefully will provide some needed relief. We knew the industry was in a tough spot already, but then you add the coronavirus, and then you add all this glut and reduced demand, which is really a problem. The last thing I would say on demand is, because of the slowdown in the economy, is the Strategic Petroleum Reserve has a lot of capacity that can be used to store some of this oil, because right now we keep producing it and there's no place for it to go. And hopefully we can buy a significant amount of that oil for a rainy day in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Very good. Senator, let's switch over to infrastructure for just a second. I know I had the privilege of being out with you on Galveston Bay a little over a month ago with the Coast Guard and the Corps of Engineers and Senator Taylor and Mayor Bechtel, some of the stakeholders from the region, to actually view the physical location of the proposed gates for the hurricane or the coastal spine project. Will any of this, excuse me, either virus funding or the proposed infrastructure bill come into play to support that project?
Well, I think correct me if I'm wrong, Chad, I think we're waiting for the Corps of Engineers to come up with a final proposal, if I'm not mistaken. And I'm committed to working with you and other friends and allies in the region to try to make sure that this becomes a reality. We know how important the Houston area is to our nation's economy. And while many of our friends don't want to build refineries or have these facilities in their backyard, we do, because we understand the importance it has to our economy and to jobs and the like. but that makes us particularly vulnerable. And so I'm committed to continuing to work with you and the state legislature and the governor and others to come up with a plan that enjoys consensus support. I know that's hard to do, but once the plan is in place, then we'll look for opportunities to try to get some federal financial assistance. We were pretty successful when it came to Hurricane Harvey. On a bipartisan basis, we've got about $30 billion in disaster relief. We know some of that money could be saved in the future if it was just invested early in things that would mitigate the future storms harming our region and our state. And so this is a longer term commitment, I think. And while I certainly support anything that we can do on infrastructure, and there's been a lot of discussion about that, a lot less discussion about how to pay for it. And but we have some ideas there as well. But we'll look for every opportunity we can to deal with our infrastructure. We're a fast-growing state, and we need the public safety, the environmental protection, and the economic boost that good infrastructure supplies.
Thank you, sir.
I'm going to stick with energy here, and I'm just going to go back. You already talked about the infrastructure, but to me, the key issue for us really is the widening of the ship channel. We call it Project 11 coming along. You've been a great supporter for us on it and things like that. We're waiting on the Chiefs report. We're waiting to get to word later in this year on it and things like that. The question has come up among industry when they hear about, the push for infrastructure. We got $1 billion project. We talked about the markets already, being low, but once the markets come back, our ability to get to those markets efficiently is through that ship channel and through our intercoastal waterway and our river systems and things like that. Can you speak a little bit about the priority of waterway infrastructure and specifically the Project 11 of the widening of the Houston Ship Channel?
Well, Bill, you're exactly right. I mean, when some people talk about infrastructure, they're talking solely about roads and bridges. But we know that pipelines are infrastructure, our inland waterways are infrastructure, our ports are critical infrastructure, and certainly the ports we have on the Gulf Coast support the rest of the nation. So we'll continue to make that case and make sure that we are at the table when those discussions are held and that we're not sort of left out of those discussions. I'll probably have to get Laura to refresh my memory exactly where we stand on the widening of the channel there, but I know that there's an importance to having two-way traffic and some increased depth in order to deal with the demand there. But we'll get you the latest and greatest when it comes to where we stand on that. I just don't have that right at the top of mind.
Very good. Senator, this next question comes from one of our members who's heavily involved in our policy as well as with the East Harris County Manufacturers Association. He says, as someone who's works closely with a dozen or more of the 501c6 organizations, he understands those, the effectiveness of those groups working with the small businesses. Most of those groups on average employ less than 10 people and are dependent upon businesses and industry and membership and events and things like that to raise money to pay the salaries. What do you see in the possible next round of funding or a possibility of including those 501c6 organizations in the recovery package?
Well, Chad, I've heard a lot about that topic because we covered 501c3s, but there was some debate about how broad to make that. But if the goal is to keep people on the payroll and keep these businesses viable, seems to me we need to look at broadening that in the next bill. There will, I'm almost certainly, be another piece of legislation, at least one, and I would predict maybe more, given the severity of the threat to not only our health but to the economy as well. So we'll certainly look to you and others to try to figure out how we craft that. Sometimes we inadvertently run into hot button issues by And that was one of the issues here is who exactly would be covered. But we'll have to have that discussion and try to be as specific as we can to avoid some of those controversies that might derail us, but by broadening the support for our nonprofits.
We understand completely. Appreciate that. Captain?
Okay, I'll go back to industry, the energy industry, and it's something basically, I don't know if it's been on your radar, and I'll just bring it up just to put it on your radar. But the East and West Coast have about 2.8 million barrels of refining capacity. And they're because we don't have crude lines that go to them from here, they're going to be fed by foreign oil. So just to put it in your back pocket that as we go forward, they're paying $5 more a barrel, $10 a barrel to bring that in because we don't have the very large vessels to do the Jones Act trade. So if there's a way that maybe we could use a waiver on the Jones Act, and I'm talking really large crude, the 350, the 400 million barrel crude carriers to get it to our two coasts from here. You know, as we talk about, we're pumping foreign oil into the coast, and we could do that from here if it needed to be a card we need to play in this oil discussion. So I just throw it out there for you.
That's an important point. I did recently get briefed by some of what's happening down in Corpus Christi. I think what they call these very large, I can't remember what the acronym is, but
Crude carriers, yeah.
But it's carry 1 million or more barrels of oil. It's just an incredible amount. But that's a useful statistic to have, especially in talking to my friends in the East and West Coast where they are paying more money because they can't get access to domestic supply, which we could provide with these larger crude carriers. So I appreciate you mentioning that. We'll keep that definitely in mind.
Thank you.
Senator, I think we've got one more time for one more question from me and maybe even Captain Deal as well. Again, from one of our board members, is there any real consideration that the federal government would serve as a backstop to the insurance carriers in order to pay out business interruption claims to their insureds, regardless if that coverage would apply or not, given these circumstances?
Yeah, that was actually one of the things that we talked about when we passed the CARES Act. We were trying to figure out how to make this happen as quickly and as efficiently as possible. And one of the arguments was to do this through insurance and through the business interruption model, which already exists. That's something I think we need to look at again, because obviously none of these delivery systems are perfect. And if that provides an alternative or a more efficient way to get money to people during these business interruptions, then we certainly ought to consider that and maybe implement that as part of the solution. The difficult part of this is none of us know how long this is going to go on. I can pretty much guarantee this won't be the last one of these we deal with. And the question is, are we going to be better prepared, and will we have framework in place to deal with it that is more effective? Because what all of us want to reduce the amount of time that this virus is a threat from a public health standpoint, but also reduce the amount of economic upheaval and harm as much as possible. So that's definitely one of the things we need to look closer at.
Appreciate that. Captain, you have one more final question?
I think to be respectful of the senator, I think we should let him go back and do the great work for him.
Well, since I've been confined to quarters here, I think I've done about 45 of these types of calls. It's amazing how much you can get done with technology, but I'm grateful to each of you for the chance to speak directly to you and the folks on the call and on the Zoom call. And thank you for your questions. We'll continue to work with you as this develops. I just think we need to stay close to one another and try to help each other out the best we can. And when we do that, we'll come out just fine on the backside. Thanks. God bless.
Thank you so much, Senator. we appreciate your time, and we appreciate you arranging further time with an SBA specialist that we'll continue to have a little Q&A with here. So thank you
Sounds
very
good.
much. Yes, sir.
Senator, I echo Chad's remarks. Thank you for your leadership in DC. Your local guy, Jay, and staff are doing wonderful things too. And keep up the good work. In any way we can support you, let us know.
Thanks. Thanks a lot. We're all in this together. Thank you very much.
Now I'd like to, I'm not sure of who we have on the call with us from the Small Business Administration. So if I could ask them to introduce themselves and give a kind of a quick background on where we are today and what issues that they think that they're addressing, and then we'll open it up for questions with that individual. So I'm not sure who actually joined us, so if they could introduce themselves, that would be appreciated.
Good morning or good afternoon, whichever the case. Morning, it still is. Tim Jeffcoat. I'm with the Small Business Administration here in Houston. Give you a quick overview of what we've got going on. As everyone knows, there are two main lending programs that are available to affected small businesses as a result of the coronavirus. And I'll talk about those very briefly. I mean, the Senator already covered a lot of the important points. I want to make sure everybody is aware that there are more than two, a few other things available to small businesses right now that are affected. First, and not to be trivialized at all, is here in the Houston area are about 250 free consultants that can work with small businesses right now on issues that they face, including getting these loans. But things right now that are really important are cash flow management, probably supply chain management, and as well as doing some planning of what to do once they can achieve some stability during disaster so that they can get out of this disaster and prosper. So we have about 250 or so resources available at no cost. That's through the Texas Gulf Coast Small Business Development Centers, the SCORE Mentors, and the WBEA Women's Business Center. In addition to that, a few other things that have occurred fairly recently that you may not be aware of, and I think it is absolutely worth discussing. For businesses that have current SBA business loans, they can get those payments postponed for up to 6 months. That can give them some immediate cash flow relief. If they have what's called a 7A loan, which is the most common one here in the Houston area, then not only, it's not that the payments are being postponed, we are actually going to pay those payments for them for the next 6 months. That's actually beginning on March 27th. So as long as their loan was in what we call good servicing status, then that loan will be paid on behalf of the borrower for the next 6 months by the SBA. One last thing, if a business that you know is affected and they have an existing disaster loan for their business, such as from Harvey, then that has automatically been deferred until December 31 of this year. So they do not have to make those payments until after December 31 of 2020. So the Senator talked a lot about the Paycheck Protection Program. I'll throw in a few extra things, but I think he's covered a lot of the important things to start. But there's also the SBA Economic Injury Disaster Loan. That loan has been used a number of times here in the Houston area to give businesses here relief from various disasters. Let me talk about that first. The Economic Injury Disaster Loan is up to $2 million, up to 30 years to repay, 3.75% interest rate for small businesses, and it is applicable for the vast majority of businesses that are in existence. There's no costs affiliated with it. There is only a personal guarantee if the loan is for more than $200,000. So this is available right now. Ordinarily, the loan application requires quite a few things for the SBA loan analyst to use in order to service that business and help them. It has been dramatically streamlined in light of this crisis. So going to our webpage right now, sba.gov/disaster, the process, it basically asks demographic questions. Who are you? Where are you? How do we reach you? What's your taxpayer identification number? Who owns your business? And a few other pertinent things along those lines. Asks for two numbers. What are your revenues and what are your costs? From that, we're going to be able to respond to that small business and be able to provide them with estimates of loans that would help them through this crisis. So that's happening as we speak. The loan process, or rather application process, depending on the business, but in most cases is going to take less than an hour to complete. It's a very streamlined, very simple process, 100% online. They don't need anybody to help them. They don't need to hire anyone to help them out. The CARES Act did create a new component of the economic injury disaster loan. So at the time you apply, you give us your bank account number, your routing number, and you click a box that says, I would like an advance. That advance is predicated on the size of the small business. If it's a very small size business, then it will be at the lower end. If it's a very large small business, then it could be the maximum, which is $10,000. The intent is that that is deposited into their account within 3 days of the SBA receiving their application. We have spoken to some businesses in this area that that's exactly what happened for them. There are other businesses that that is not what has happened for them. The only thing that I can counsel those businesses is to contact our Office of Disaster Assistance. That same website I rattled off a minute ago, sba.gov/disaster. You can find there a toll-free number and an email address. Both are monitored 24/7. And anybody that thinks they haven't gotten an advance and they are due in advance should contact them at that phone number or that email address, and they will be able to help them. In my office, we are the SBA that's here 365 days a year in Houston helping Americans start and grow their small business. So disaster is only what we do from time to time. So we don't have access to those systems, so we are not of help to them in that respect. Let's see, what else is important about the economic injury disaster loan? The entire process under an ordinary disaster, and I realize that's an oxymoron, is about 4 weeks. From the time somebody applies till the time we conclude the loan amount and start funding them, or rather complete the loan documentation, is generally about 4 weeks. When that's concluded, then within 5 days, they'll get their initial disbursement of money, which is $25,000 at a minimum, not counting that advance. So that's in a nutshell. That's what's going on with economic injury disaster loan. It's outstanding. It doesn't have the same forgiveness as PPP, but it does give up to a 30-year term, the whole point being to make this as affordable as possible for the small businesses involved. The Payroll Protection Program, that is new to the world. As the senator pointed out, it came into existence last Friday afternoon at about 3:30 when the president signed the act. So we've been putting that into practice. Here's what's really important to know. It is administered through existing SBA lenders. It may be administered through other lenders that could be approved by the Treasury Department. To my knowledge, that has not occurred, but that's also something the Treasury Department is doing and not the SBA, so it's not surprising that I don't know details on that. But it is administered predominantly through SBA lenders. Here in the Houston area, we've got a little less than 200 of those. They have received from the SBA detailed guidance that tells them what to do to adapt to this new loan program to the overall 7A process. We've also set up for them a toll-free number that they can call to reach the subject matter experts at the SBA that are capable of answering any detailed questions they have. Anytime we issue a guidance, it can't cover 100% of the cases because of the idiosyncrasies of individual businesses, but it does cover the significant majority of cases. So the banks, the SBA lenders here in the Houston area have been aggressively promoting and supporting this program. One common question is, I went to my bank and they say they're not able to do PPP loans any longer. Well, that's not because we told them they can't. That's because there's some external factor as to why maybe they are incapable of doing any more or they have chosen not to do anymore. The important point that you need to know is any small businesses that encounter that can go to the SBA Houston website, and on my webpage is a listing of the local lenders Among other things, it points out which ones are currently accepting new customers. So these are customers they do not have an existing banking relationship with. At the moment, there are several that are doing that. That information, I'm sure, will be changing over time, and it may be changing as we speak. But that information was updated, I think, about 24 hours ago, so it should be pretty current. The PPP application process is quite simple, just like the economic injury disaster loan process. It's essentially the same information that I mentioned, except when it comes to numbers, it's going to look at the average payroll of the business rather than their revenues and their expenses. Again, it is focused predominantly on payroll. It can also apply to rent, mortgage interest, and utilities, but it's not going to be useful for businesses such as refiners or manufacturers that have lots and lots of operating costs. They probably would be looking at the economic injury disaster loan or both. The bottom line on this one, whereas with the economic injury disaster loan, it's up to 30 years, no payments for 1 month, rather 1 year after you receive the loan, and a 3 3/4% interest rate. This is 2 years, 1% interest rate, and payments are deferred for the first 6 months. The aspect of the PPP that really sets it apart from the economic injury disaster loan is that the loan can be forgiven up to 100%. That's based on keeping your employment levels and salaries pre-disaster the same after you receive this loan. So to use an example, if I have 10 employees that pay each one $1,000 a month, and my average payroll is $10,000 per month with 10 employees. So after receiving this loan, the federal government is looking for that business to have 10 employees hired at $1,000 apiece. They do that, and obviously I'm oversimplifying, but they do that and they can be forgiven up to 100%. One important caveat is that at least 75% of the money of the amount spent must be for payroll. So again, it's called Payroll Protection Program because it is focused on payroll protection program. The website here in Houston that I mentioned where you can find that lender list is sba.gov/tx/Houston, or you can simply Google SBA Houston and it should be the first thing that you see. With that, in a nutshell, that is where we stand. That's what's going on with the SBA right now. In my office, we are doing public webinars. They really are simply restating what is on our websites and in our published materials, but we try to present it in a way that we hope is more digestible to the public so that they can take advantage of all these wonderful programs. We also do webinars daily with the lending community in Houston so that we can make sure they get the information they need. And once again, it's the same guidance that they've already been given, but we're trying to present it in a way that could be more digestible, particularly to the lenders that are less experienced. With that, I think I can answer some questions or try to answer some questions.
Thank you, Tim. Bill, I guess I'll kick it off here. I did want to remind everybody, both Economic Alliance and Port Bureau members, that in our office, of course, not physically, but virtually right now, we have for years, over a decade, hosted the SBDC office, and their director here is Herb Hildebrandt. He can help with a lot of these issues for small businesses. So I just want to make sure that people know that they can contact that office directly, or if you need help contacting them, you can always contact us here at the Economic Alliance, and we'll put you in touch with the SBDC here for this region. I'm going to start with this. I know we've got a good question or two from our participation audience, but Tim, you probably heard the senator talk about 501c6s and the PPP and their non-eligibility for that right now. Can you give some clarification on the EIDL loan process? Are 501c6s eligible
So your question was on the EIDL loan, or as we like to call it, the EIDL loan. Which categories are covered under nonprofits, right?
Yeah, specifically, our 501c6 is eligible for that loan.
I don't think so. Give me a quick second and let me look at the exact application screen, and it says 501c, D, or E. And on the PPP, not that you asked that, but it's 501c. Then there's a couple of unusual categories for veterans organizations and tribal organizations.
I think the point here, I guess, Tim, is that if you could echo it back up the chain of command, that the C6s are struggling just as much as any other small business, and if there's some way that in the future legislation or something that they could be included instead of excluded. I'll kind of jump to a second question, which is the payroll protection program. It seems that the private equity group ownerships, this is from one of the banks, are currently under legislation that causes the affiliation problems for them to apply. Is there any way to expand to private equity groups?
You mean so far as PPP to be able to fund private equity groups?
Right. The payroll protection plan. That's the payroll protection program seems to be the big home run. And that's what people want to get under the umbrella. And the question was not only C6s, which was a different question, which we know is not eligible, but the other one was the private equity group that have ownership stuff. They seem to be not able to process through it.
That I do not know. I honestly do not know. There's a huge assortment of small businesses that are included. I don't know what percentage of small businesses that represents, but it's got to be, we've got to have some decimal points on the end of the 99 for that one. So that one, I'm absolutely not aware of private equity not being able to be covered. Under ordinary circumstances with SBA lending, any kind of lending organization is ineligible. I understand private equity is not necessarily a lending organization. But for PPP, I'm not aware of anything, but I have made note of that, and I will make a point of sharing that.
Thank you.
Maybe one more question regarding the interest expense deduction from 30 to 50% that the senator mentioned. Is there a limit to the size of businesses who would be eligible for that? And if so, where can they go to find out more about that?
They would want to go to, I believe, they're going to want to go to the Internal Revenue Service. That's not an SBA thing. I personally am zero awareness of it. We are just completely fixated on SBA's part of this recovery for PPP and EIDL. So I'm sorry, I can't answer you there. So I'm striking out. I got a batting average of 0 so far.
No, that's all right. And Bill, you chime in here if I'm correct. I think we are bumping up against our limit window on time. Is that correct?
That is correct. Thank you.
All right. Well, I do want to say thank you to Tim from the SBA. And again, thank you to all of our members for joining today. We appreciate the good questions and certainly the time from the senator and Tim as well. Captain Deal, any last remarks before we sign off?
I do want to acknowledge Tim Jeffcoat. I didn't get the chance to introduce you formally, but he's the district director of the Small Business Administration. So we did get the head of the office here on, and the overview you gave us was probably the key to get people engaged and where they need to go get information. And so we appreciate you did a great job. I think you hit a home run. All right. So thank you for that. And that's pretty much it. I guess I'll just sign off telling everyone to have a great afternoon. And then you can disconnect now, and we will put this up on the web pages when we get it cleaned up. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you, Bill. And thank you to Christine there at the Bureau for helping us navigate this.
Thank you, everyone.
All right.